Could Paul George be the answer for the Philadelphia 76ers in the second round? Or is this team once again just getting everybody's hopes up? The big three or the big no for the Philadelphia 76ers?
You are Locked On 76ers, your daily Philadelphia 76ers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome. You are locked on to the Philadelphia 76ers, Kayla, Santiago, and Keith Pompey with all of you. Thank you all so much for making Sixers your first listen every day, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. And before we get into the action, we have to tell you about FanDuel. You can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. Place your first $5 bet, and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com to start today. Kayla, Santiago, sideline reporter for the Delaware Blue Coats, the Sixers G League team, and of course, Keith Pompey, a writer for the Philadelphia Inquirer for the Philadelphia 76ers. So today we're going to touch on a lot of different things. It is obviously the preseason still for Philadelphia. Keith has been make sure you follow him on Twitter. He has all the details. But when you look at this Philadelphia 76ers team right now, is Paul George going to be the guy that gets them over the hump? Also, we're going to talk about the top teams in the East because it's not just the Sixers. We all know who I'm talking about. You might want to close your eyes and shut your ears. It's those Celtics you got to worry about, the New York Knicks as well. And then, of course, Joel Embiid not practicing. Is that really going to be an issue? Are fans happy about that? What are the coaches thinking? Prioritizing his health is key, but when does it become too much? When do they need him to practice? But first, we're going to start off with Paul George, of course. He has had a lot of praise, Keith, from head coach Nick Nurse. Nick Nurse saying defensively, he just has a knack, and that's what he's loved to see about him. He's played on another level. You've been able to be there, see him practice. What have you seen so far?
You know, it's weird. By the time when we get in there, it's really, they're not doing much, right? You see Paul knocking down shots and everything like that. But you know what? Right now is early days, and, we really won't know if he's the perfect fit or not until they start playing real games, right? And we really won't know until around January. But this is what I'm going to say. When you have Paul George, he is the perfect fit on paper for the 76ers. Why is that? Right now you have, he's a wing player. He's an all-star wing. He's a future Hall of Famer. And the best attribute I can say is that he's a guy who can bring it on the offensive end, but he also can bring it on the defensive end where he can guard the best other team's best perimeter player. That's what the 76ers need. I mean, when you look at this trio and you look at Paul George, how he fits in with this team, all you say is, okay, so you subtract Tobias Harris and you add Paul George. And you look at it and you see the versatility that Paul George has that Tobias doesn't. So that's what makes him, a really good fit. Secondly, he's also in a phase of his career in which he wants to win and play the right way, right? And the Sixers believe that George can be a solid passer who can also help with some of the ball handling duties. So on paper, right now, he's a perfect fit and the best fit for them to get to a championship.
Thinking of the Sixers past, you look at James Harden, and I'm just sitting here thinking now, James Harden has never won an NBA championship, yet he came in here with a little bit of an ego, and at the end was a complete diva. Maybe he helped out Tyrese Maxey, but he didn't help the Sixers do anything. In his first playoff series with the Sixers, he took two shots. I was there. I was viewing it. I was reporting on it, writing up a story, and it was like, come on, you really want to play? You can give a little bit more effort than that. And I think the thing with Paul George, I already like that Nick Nurse is talking about his defensive adaptability early on because that shows that he's putting the effort out there. Now, once again, Keith, we don't really know anything until they actually all step out on the floor together. But throughout his time with the Clippers, he averaged 21.5 points defensively. He was able to go out on the wing as well as down low. I mean, Paul George is going to have to be this third guy, and I think that he's ready for it. And right now, I mean, if you have a guy like Nick Nurse and a head coach that believes in him, that says a lot to me because I don't think Nick Nurse is just going to have these quotes for the media. And I know all these coaches are media trained, but at the same time, Nick Nurse knows how to coach these players. He's won an NBA Finals, and it's exciting to see really him around all these players together.
You know what? It truly is. And the thing is, right now, like I hate to say it, like when Nick and them, they all say stuff like they also say, oh, wow, we got great camaraderie. Well, just about all NBA teams have great camaraderie right now. Even the team that was in last place, they all love each other, right? And it's all until, so when he says stuff, I kind of like, I listen, but I'm also like, all right, let me just store this because what else is he going to say? We'll see how it is in a couple months. But the one thing that really pinpointed what you said, you talked about Harden, right? So we had big expectations for Harden. He comes in, he doesn't do much. But the difference between Harden and Paul George has struggled too in the postseason. But the difference between Harden is that he needs the ball, right? So that's not really a good mesh with Embiid, who needs the ball, right? Maxey needs the ball, right? And so when you have a guy like Paul, he can play off of the two, and that's what makes him a pretty good option. And let's face it, if Harden wasn't scoring, he wasn't stopping anyone defensively. You know what I mean? He wasn't making he could pass the ball, but he was he was an offensive player, whereas Paul can do other things when his shot's not falling. So that's what makes him the perfect fit.
And I know nobody wants to hear this, especially people that have covered the Sixers or have watched the Sixers for a really long time. But Ben Simmons is a guy that when he left the Sixers and you're like, oh, well, James Harden you bring in. Obviously, offensively, James Harden is so much better. But defensively, Ben Simmons was really a step up. And the thing about that is he didn't give the effort all the time. There was obviously issues within the front office, within the organization of the Philadelphia 76ers. But it did show a lot when Ben Simmons was not there defensively. And it was a lot of trouble, especially for those wings. And in our next topic in a little bit, we're going to talk about just the guards that the East has. But I think Paul George is an upgrade from James Harden. And I'm not just saying that because everything seems fine and dandy now. Offensively, Keith, I really don't mind his production as long as he's able to average that 20 points per game mark throughout the season. I'm okay. Defense is where I'm worried about because these guards in the East are the real deal, and you don't want to drop too many games and mess up with your seeding come playoff time. So defense is what I'm looking at. It's what Nick Nurse is looking at, and that's a step up, Keith, from James Harden.
It's a major step up. I mean, you look at him like we talked about, he was just extremely one-dimensional. And then so when we look at Paul George, and this is what I say when you talk about the Tobias Harris thing, right? You look at Harden. Harden was probably about 6'5", right? Paul George, he's a legitimate 6'8" and a legitimate 220 pounds, right? So we talk about defense. Last season, right, as a 34-year-old, he averaged 1.5 steals per game. He also shot a career best 41.3% on three-pointers. So right then and there, you're looking at this guy as an elite 3-and-D. And with his length being 6'8", he's a guy that you can say, hey, guess what, Paul? You know what? We need you to lock down the other guy's best perimeter player. He can do that. You know what I mean? He can do that, and he's more versatile. So you look at it, Harden, yes, Harden averaged a lot of assists, but Paul George was 22.6 points, 3.5 assists, 5.2 rebounds, on top of that 1.5 steals. So, yes, he's extremely much more versatile than James Harden.
And in my mind right now, if everything was perfect, the Sixers would have known in the future that Ben Simmons was not going to pan out for them, and they would have kept Jimmy Butler, and this team would have won an NBA championship already. But, you talk about the 3-and-D, and that instantly makes me think of Jimmy Butler, what he brought to the team. That was still when Joel Embiid was really, really developing. And I think just like we talked about last night where James Harden helped Tyrese Maxey develop, I do think that Jimmy Butler really helped Joel Embiid develop. Although they're not the same position, it was that confidence. It was going out there, giving the full effort, having in your mind that if you go out there and dominate every single game, you will be the best player in the league. Jimmy Butler instilled that in Joel Embiid. Does this bring up any similarities for you of the Jimmy Buckets era now for the Philadelphia 76ers, having that 3-and-D guy now that will go after the loose balls, will get back on defense and can go the other way and score?
No, that's a great question, but he's still different. And the reason why he's still different is because, don't get me wrong, like they both can do some similar things, right? But the problem is, the reason why Jimmy Buckets isn't here anymore is because what happened? You had Ben Simmons. Ben Simmons wanted to have the ball in his hands.
Yep.
When Jimmy Buckets was here and they were playing in the postseason, they took the ball out of Ben Simmons' hand, and he was basically playing power forward, right?
Yeah.
So whereas you have a guy right now who doesn't need the ball. Now, don't get me wrong. Paul George can set you up. He can get shots. He can do all that other things. But he doesn't need the ball. And that's the reason why he's probably, on paper, the best fit that the Sixers have had since Embiid has been here to pair with Embiid.
Well, Keith, I hope that paper is the perfect storybook that's able to sell as a hardback book as well when the Sixers bring this team possibly past the second round with Paul George, if he is the perfect fit. But we are going to talk about a little bit of that playoff picture and what the East currently looks like right now, with a lot of teams getting better. But before we get to that, we have to tell you about FanDuel. Of course, we have to tell you about FanDuel. Hey, NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return to FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. You can't get much better than that, everybody, for FanDuel.com. And when you place your first $5 bet, that's at FanDuel.com. Make sure you visit them today at FanDuel.com. And if you want to look at some lines right now, some bets that you want to maybe cash in on as you look at football coming up, the Minnesota Vikings have been red hot at 4-0 and are only 2.5-point favorites to the New York Jets. That game in London. We're going to have our coffee, get ready for the 9:30 a.m. kickoff on Sunday. We're talking basketball, though, and it is the WNBA semifinals. So we're going to look at some of their odds. I'm super excited for these games coming up. You got the New York Liberty, the Aces, the Lynx, and the Connecticut Sun. So the Minnesota Lynx are underdogs going into the game Friday night, according to FanDuel's spread. And the Las Vegas Aces, in a must-win game, are 2.5-point favorites on the New York Liberty. So make sure you head over to FanDuel right now to place your bets. America's #1 sportsbook. Be sure to visit FanDuel today to place all of these bets. All right, so we are back with more action. And this is one of my favorite topics to talk about. And it has been all off season long. And when the Knicks got Karl-Anthony Towns, I was frustrated as ever because my mind immediately went to the playoffs, what happened last year with the Philadelphia 76ers. So, Keith, clearly the Sixers are a team that people are talking about as a squad that's going to do very well in the East. But right now, who are you looking at? I think the Celtics at this point are still above everybody. They bring every single person back. They've got a really good front office and coaching organization. But for you right now, are you not super high on the Celtics? Who's your top team? And any other teams that you look at right now that might be a real problem for the Philadelphia 76ers?
You know what? I'm extremely high on the Celtics, right? I'm about to say high on the 76ers. But I'm extremely high on the Celtics. But the one thing is, you know, I want to see how long Kristaps Porzingis stays out, right?
Yeah.
But I do believe that, I mean, I shouldn't say believe, but, you know, what you read and what you hear is that he could be back by Christmas, if not January. I feel like if it's any longer, they may have a problem. But I do think that they're still a step ahead of everyone, right? The other team, of course, is the New York Knicks. You know, and then here's my dark horse, the team that no one's really talking about, but it was a team that went to the Eastern Conference Finals last year, and that's the Indiana Pacers. They're not sexy on paper. They're not. Now, again, I do believe that the 76ers are better than them, but at the same time, I do feel like that they were a team that was tough. They were a team that was gritty. And, you know, you have Tyrese Halliburton, who can be tough to guard. They come at you in waves. So that's a sleeper team to me. But if I have to choose two teams, it's going to be the Knicks and it's going to be the Boston Celtics and the Sixers are the three top teams in the East.
Unfortunately, I have to agree with you on the top two, and I can't stand saying that because if you look at this Celtics team, it was the worst case scenario for the Philadelphia 76ers. Watching that team go to the NBA Finals. But the one thing I like about the Celtics is they did every single thing right. They had a lot of homegrown talent that they were able to build around. They got all the right pieces and go on to win everything. So you look at it right now, and I think one thing about the Celtics, and I've had so many conversations on so many topics, Jason Tatum is a player that has not really been in the MVP conversations. He's always on the list that you see on Twitter, maybe 1 through 4, but it's always Jason Tatum has too good of a team around him to be MVP. Keith, I think he's tired of that, and I think he's ready to put on a statement here saying, hey, we just won, but I still have more to prove, because then he can have another accolade. I agree with the Knicks too, and to me, the Knicks is the team that scares me the most, because the Celtics, if you lose to them, it might be expected, but the Knicks is a team that you lost to last year. They got that much better. I think Joel Embiid is leaps and bounds better than Karl Anthony Towns, but it's those guards you worry about a little bit. So much talent, so scrappy, and you're going to need to instill in the Sixers team that you got to go after those loose balls. You got to have all that energy if this goes to a Game 7, because that Knicks team is not going to let up, especially after how far they got last year.
Exactly, and that's also the reason why the Sixers want these guys to relax and take their time and do everything, because, you know, they're going to need to. I mean, the Sixers are an older team. I mean, you know, we're talking about, you know, guys coming off the bench who you're dependent on, like a Reggie Jackson, 34, probably 35, you know, once the playoffs come. And then you have Eric Gordon, 35 right now. You know, Kyle Lowry, you know, depending on how much minutes he plays, he's 38 years old. But then you look ahead and you look at the Knicks, and these are some young, gritty guys who come at you. So when you think about that, it's like, you know, it's a battle of, yes, we both had experienced guys, but the question mark, are you asking yourself, well, while these Knicks guys are getting ready to go into their prime, how much do the Sixers reserves that we're talking about have left in the tank? So yeah, you know, that's the thing. And the one thing that really concerns me about the Knicks team is that, and we talked about it before, Joel Embiid is better than Karl Anthony Towns.
Yes.
But they have a bunch of dogs on their team that fit the mentality of the coach. So that's where a guy like Caleb Martin, that's where a Yabusele, right? The Dancing Bear. These are where these guys come into play to try to combat what the New York Knicks are going to bring.
And I think it can be a little scary for the Sixers, because every year after year, you see all these sports shows saying the Sixers are the favorite. Back when they had Al Horford, the Sixers are the favorite to win. The Sixers are the favorite to win with James Harden. Now they're with Paul George, and it's a lot of the same conversation that people are high on the Sixers, but they've also seen what the Celtics can do and the Knicks can do. And realistically, you're not going to know if the Philadelphia 76ers have enough until you see them play on the floor and get to that point of the season. But I think it's so tough right now. Joel Embiid, not necessarily in his full prime anymore, possibly a little bit, but he's definitely exiting his way out unless he somehow pulls a healthy streak for the next 3 years, which I think we both can be honest with ourselves. That's not really his MO. He's been injured every single season. If you get injured during the regular season, I don't mind. During the postseason is going to be the issue. But I really like the Knicks and the Celtics. Do you think Sixers are top 3? Do you have the Bucks in there, the Pacers in there? Or are you out on the Bucks right now with all their injuries too?
I'm out on the Bucks. Yeah, I am, because, you know, you look at you know, Chris Middleton. He's another guy. You know, in regards to their big three, he's the third best player, but he was hurt last season. He's hurt this season. You know, so I have some concerns about that. You know, there are other teams. I just don't think they're ready. You know, people talk about the Orlando Magic, a nice young team, but I just don't think that they're in that upper echelon. I feel like the 76ers are there, and it's going to come down to the Sixers, the Knicks, and Boston. But here's the thing. I'm not ruling out with the Sixers. I think it's going to be hard. The one thing that you talked about, Jason Tatum, if Jason Tatum goes out there, I feel like, and says, hey, I'm trying to win MVP, I think that's the best thing for the Sixers and the Knicks, because guess what? He's going to start gunning, and then they're going to lose that balanced attack that they have, because he's going to try to do too much. That's what you want him to do. Guys are going to get upset. And there's also, you're not going to take advantage of how great of a player Jaylen Brown is, right? So if I'm the Sixers, I want Jason Tatum to be on a revenge tour to try to prove people that he should have played more in the Olympics, because that's going to help the Sixers. But because I feel like if they play balanced ball, Boston is going to be tough to beat.
Well, Jason Tatum, if you're watching this, we want you to win the NBA MVP. Make sure you're on a revenge tour for not playing in the Olympics that much. And make sure you make it all about you so somehow the Sixers can come in and beat the Boston Celtics. But we have so much more to talk about, too. Speaking of the health topic, we're beating it like a dead horse, but Joel Embiid, once again, not practicing for the Philadelphia 76ers. And he also has a lot of nice things to say about one particular rookie. All right, so Joel Embiid is not practicing. This is exactly what we thought would happen before their practices even started. He's trying to prioritize his health, Keith. And I think that's something that's really important to point out, because I'm sure Joel Embiid wants to practice, right? He's a competitor. He wants to be out there, but he's realizing that the only way this team gets anywhere is if he can stay healthy. He talks to the media a little bit today, coming out and saying, this is just what I need to do. I do worry a little bit him not practicing that much with the entire team, especially all the new acquisitions. I want the guy to be healthy, and I get it, especially at his age. But is there any worry, or by talking to Joel, did you see any worry or nerves out of him not being able to practice too much with the team? Or is it just kind of standard, he's getting ready to sit out throughout this preseason and be back when he's fully healthy?
It's a great question, because, when you look at Joel, over the last several years, a couple of years, he is, you hear more about, Joel didn't really do much today. It's like, it's all about management. It's about, trying to get him to, to be healthy and stuff like that. Or he was overcoming injuries. Like, he would do other things, right?
Right.
But with this one, I guess, you can look at it and say it's just maintenance, but then you can also look at it and say, but it would be great to have them on the floor so they can get things ironed out with all these new faces on the team. Mm-hmm. And last year it was one of those things of even when Harden was going through his stuff, I remember you would go to preseason games or something like that, and Joel would be basically talking to Tobias like, hey, you go here, I'll get you the ball, I do this, I do that. Well, they're not doing practice stuff like that with him. So right. To me, it is kind of a little concerning, especially when you know that this is a guy who was basically playing in the Olympics, right? Mm-hmm. A couple months ago. And now all of a sudden it's like, oh, we want to take it along gradually. And you think to yourself, well, maybe it would have been pretty good if he didn't play in the Olympics. And then now he could be in enough shape that not shape, but in enough health. His health could be high enough to where he could, practice with his team. So to me, that's the only concerning thing, is because he was playing in the Olympics, but now you're saying you want to bring it along slowly so you can deliver him for the playoffs.
I went on record, by the way, and said that I did not want Joel Embiid playing in the Olympics at all. Once they took out Kawhi Leonard, I said they need to do the same thing with Joel Embiid. Now, don't get me wrong. I love seeing everything on Twitter of him holding up a gold medal and winning. But when you look at this season and you look at somebody like Kawhi Leonard pulling out, you say, okay, you know exactly why he's doing that. And it's not like Joel Embiid was a Jason Tatum and didn't really play in the Olympics. No, he played, and a lot of people liked his game as well. So I think that's one thing you look at definitely for a voice of concern for Joel Embiid. And this shows me too, Keith, that he's clearly not going to play the preseason, but we may not even see him for a little bit during the regular season, because not only does he need to start practicing every day to get there, but even just being involved, like you alluded to, with the team, having those conversations, being able to gain that chemistry. If they're really separating him right now a little bit to try to rehab and get healthy, it's going to take a while. We might not see him until maybe a little bit more earlier in the season, not in the beginning. And it's going to be interesting how this team kind of gels without having their superstar.
Yeah, and that's a good point. Then the thing is, I keep going back and forth with that. I keep saying to myself, okay, now is there really a timeline before people can start saying, oh, we doubt if he's going to play? Like, I think that October the 20th would be a good grade a good thing to see, because at that point, let's say if he does practice a little bit next week, or he does some things, I think that he should be fine for the season open, right? I do.
Okay.
But does that mean he'll play in the next game? Who knows, right? But the thing is, and the reason why I say October 20th, if he's not doing anything by October 20th, then that's when you have to start questioning, like, okay, what are we going to do? Because at this point last year, if you think about it, the only preseason game that he played in was the final one. And then the season opener, he had like 30-something points. Like he played well. So, to me, it's kind of like I'm giving their last preseason game is October the 18th. If he doesn't practice by October the 20th, then you have to question, is he going to be able to come back and play on the season opener of October the 23rd against the Milwaukee Bucks?
It's going to get interesting. I'll tell you that. Everybody's going to be scrolling, making sure to see if Joel's practicing. They'll get a Keith Pompey alert if he's been seen practicing with the team on Twitter. And it is really interesting. The other thing about Joel Embiid, too, is we all know that he said he's lost 25 to 26 pounds. But we also know when Joel Embiid comes back to play after he's been injured or out for a little bit of time, it does take him a few games to kind of get back. Sometimes he's right on it. Other times you can see him a little bit tired. How do they manage his minutes? I think personally that Nick Nurse, Kawhi Leonard, and Joel Embiid all need to have a Zoom call and figure it out, because clearly it worked for the Raptors and Nick Nurse and Kawhi when it all won the NBA Finals. So maybe that would work for them. But Joel also giving praise to a rookie here in camp today. Jared McCain saying he's had some of the best practices so far. What do you take from that? We talked about yesterday, McCain is probably not going to see anytime really, unless it's some minutes towards the end and they're up. But what do you take from that when Joel Embiid, somebody, of course, as high profile as him, is saying this rookie's really putting in the work and has stood out the most out of everybody?
Yeah, you have to put a lot of stock into that. Now, the thing is, we'll find out when the bullets get real, right? I mean, also you look at it, and maybe some of these veteran guys are saying, like, all right, Rook, this is training camp practice. Like, go ahead to kill yourself if you want to. But at the same time, I like it because people are noticing how he's playing. He's playing hard. He's playing like someone who wants to prove that he deserves to be on the floor. And the good thing is, yes, Joel did say something about it, but this came a day after Nick Nurse was raving over him. This comes after the same day that Tyrese Maxey was raving all over him, right? So I think it's good. I think it's good. The fact that he is playing like this is good for the veterans, because guess what? Then he's not like allowing them to relax. He's pushing them at practice. And it's also, a good thing to just show you that this guy isn't being content with saying, all right, well, this isn't my year. I'm going to be maybe just a knockdown three-point shooter off the bench. No, he's coming out here to compete and win a job in a rotation. So I think it makes teammates better, and it makes it shows how much he wants to play. And I think it's a win-win for everyone. I really do.
I think that's going to matter too. And of course, a lot of people not agreeing with the draft pick early on. I was one of those people as well. And, I still don't know how good of a fit it is right now. Dalton Connect was definitely more of my fit for right now. McCain for the future, yes, but Sixers are in win now mode. So I'm still in the mindset of waiting and seeing until the season comes. And that's what it really is for all of this, right? They're just getting their feet back wet. They're during the preseason. They're getting ready for those preseason games. So we are going to have to wait and see. Keith, before we send things off, I have to throw something out there. This is the overall NBA. It could be a Sixer, and this is a really, really, really early prediction. Anybody for you that sticks out that could possibly win that most valuable player award? I brought it up earlier with Jason Tatum, so I wanted to run it back. When I said about Jason Tatum, that's not my overall pick, but for you, do you have an overall MVP pick yet?
That's a good question. I think it's going to be two people. I do. I think that, and it also will depend on, what they do. I think that Luka, of course, is going to be, he led his team to the finals. And I think that a lot of times the MVP, like, you get on the radar based off of what you did the previous season, right? So I think that Luka is probably going to be a front runner again. I think that he can do it, especially if Dallas, comes out of the West, right? The second person is my sleeper guy. It is SGA, Shea Gilgeous-Alexander. Yeah, because everybody's talking about, how good this Oklahoma City Thunder team is going to be. And I feel like if they are going to be that good and be that legitimate, that I think that he's going to get a lot of votes and a lot of people are going to rave over him. Now, there's always, Nikola Jokic, there's always Joel Embiid, but I do feel like the two guys that I mentioned are going to be the guys. And I will have to say my front runner right now is Luka Doncic to get the MVP.
I love that. Not a center this coming year. Finally, they're switching it up a bit, right? So I'm going to get my prediction real quick before we send things off. I do think Jason Tatum is going to be in the running for MVP, especially if you're looking at a ton of different guards. If Joel and Jokic aren't really in that conversation, I think that he can break that conversation. Also, my sleeper pick, I think this is a team that he's really going to have to take over now, especially without Cat. You don't have him anymore. Yes, Julius Randle's over there, but I don't really think that he's going to do much over with the Timberwolves. So I'm going to go Anthony Edwards. I really like that team. I really like him out of the West. So maybe it'll be a West MVP. We'll see if it's Luka, SGA, or Anthony Edwards, or possibly Jason Tatum, or somebody we're not even saying on this podcast because maybe everybody's going to pull a load management and not play the full season. So we will have to wait and see. So another day of Sixers camp as well as they gear up towards these preseason games. Thank you all so much for tuning in with us here tonight. And thank you again for making Locked On Sixers your first listen today. Now for your second listen, make sure you go find on Locked NBA, where the local experts keep you updated on everything, the biggest storylines ahead of the season. Find Locked On NBA on YouTube, wherever you listen to your podcast. Thank you so much for making Locked On Sixers your first listen today as well. For your other listen here this evening, find Locked On Fantasy Basketball. Become a fantasy basketball expert and get the edge over your league mates with daily tips from Josh Lloyd. Find Locked On Fantasy Basketball on YouTube, wherever you listen to. Before we send things off, one more thing, Keith. Do you play fantasy basketball?
No. I used to, but not anymore. I'm like, I would walk in the locker room like, bro, how do you go 1 for 10, man? I needed you last night. But no, I don't get in. It's pretty good, but I just don't get into it. It's too many games. I love fantasy football. I do. I got to check and see what my guys did tonight, but I'm not really into the fantasy basketball too much.
I agree with you. You're the insider. You really can't be. I don't like it either because I can't keep up with every day. Our schedules are too busy. Plus, we cover these teams as well. But maybe some Sixers players will be on people's listenings fantasy teams. So make sure you tune in to that fantasy podcast. Thank you all so much for tuning in to Locked On Sixers.